Hello and welcome to the Vailrun Tapes. Every story here is true. It happened to a real person, and they wrote it down or said it out loud, so the rest of us would know. Tonight, I'll share a few of them with you. A lot of you come back here every night, and that means a lot to me. These stories stay with people. That's just what they do. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read all of them. And if you like these stories, a quick like and subscribe really help. Now get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin.
My twin sister and I were on a family vacation in Glastonbury, in the United Kingdom, when we experienced something neither of us has ever been able to explain. We had rented a house there with the rest of our family, and up until that night, the trip had been completely normal. It was a fun vacation. We spent time exploring, eating together, and enjoying being somewhere different from home. The house itself did not feel frightening or unusual. No one had mentioned ghosts, strange lights, or anything else that might have put ideas into our heads. That night, everyone eventually went to bed. My sister and I were still awake. The weather was clear enough that we decided to go outside and look at the stars. It seemed like a peaceful way to end the evening. We stepped out into the yard and found a place where we could lie down comfortably. I do not remember whether we used a blanket or simply lay directly on the grass, but I clearly remember looking up into the sky. The area was dark enough that the stars were easy to see. There was none of the bright city light that washes everything out. The longer we looked, the more stars seemed to appear. My sister and I talked quietly for a while. There was nothing tense about the situation. We were not daring each other to stay outside or looking for something paranormal. We were not frightened by the darkness. We were simply lying beside each other and looking upward. We had been outside for around 10 minutes when the light appeared. There was no warning. One moment, the night looked normal. The next, a bright beam of light shone directly down on us. It was not a weak glow or a distant flash. It looked like someone high above had switched on a powerful spotlight and aimed it exactly where we were lying. The light came from far up in the sky. I could not see a clear object producing it. There was no visible helicopter body, plane, or structure surrounding the source. I could only see the beam and the brightness around us. It illuminated the area where we were lying with enough intensity that there was no question we had both noticed the same thing. The light seemed focused. It did not brighten the entire sky. It did not look like a flash of lightning spreading across the clouds. It was directed downward in a specific column, and we were inside it. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. We simply stared upward. The first thought that entered my mind was that some aircraft must be above us. A helicopter could use a searchlight. A plane might carry a powerful light. But there was no sound. That was one of the strangest parts. The night remained completely silent. I could not hear helicopter blades, an engine, or the sound of an aircraft moving overhead. There was no distant hum becoming louder. There was no rush of air, only the beam. If a helicopter had been close enough to shine such a bright spotlight directly onto us, I believe we should have heard it clearly. A helicopter is not subtle. Its blades produce a heavy, rhythmic sound that carries a long distance, especially at night when everything else is quiet. We heard nothing. The light stayed on us for only a few seconds. It felt longer because of the shock, but I do not believe it lasted more than a short moment. Then, it disappeared. It did not move slowly across the yard. It did not sweep away as though someone had turned the spotlight in another direction. It seemed to switch off. 1 second, the beam was there. The next, the darkness returned. My sister and I remained silent for a moment after it vanished. Then the first thing I said was, "Nobody is going to believe this." That sentence came out before either of us tried to explain what had happened. I knew immediately how unbelievable it would sound. Two people go outside to look at the stars, and a silent beam of light shines down on them from the sky before suddenly disappearing. It sounded like the beginning of a UFO story, but we had both seen it. My sister had been lying beside me. She reacted at the same time. I did not point out a faint light and convince her that something strange was happening. The beam was bright and obvious enough that both of us became silent the moment it appeared. That shared reaction is why I have never been able to dismiss the experience as something imagined. I was not alone. My sister saw the same light. After it disappeared, I wanted to remain outside. Part of me was frightened, but curiosity was stronger. I wanted to see whether it would return. If it appeared a second time, maybe we could understand where it was coming from. Perhaps an aircraft would move into view. Maybe the light would sweep across the sky and reveal a normal source. I thought staying outside might give us an answer. My sister did not feel the same way. She was scared and wanted to go back into the house. Then the wind picked up. The change felt sudden. The trees and bushes around the property began rustling. Branches moved in the darkness. Leaves scraped against one another. A few seconds earlier, the night had seemed still. Now the entire yard sounded active. The wind may have had nothing to do with the beam. Weather can change quickly, and a gust could easily have arrived at that moment by coincidence. But after the light, the movement in the trees felt like part of the same event. The darkness around us no longer felt peaceful. Every branch looked as though something might be moving behind it. My sister became even more frightened. She wanted to leave immediately. I could tell that asking her to stay would only make things worse, so we got up and ran back into the house. Once we were inside, the familiar rooms and sleeping family members made everything feel more normal. We were no longer exposed beneath the open sky. The walls and roof offered a sense of safety, even though we did not know what we had been afraid of. I do not remember whether we woke anyone or told the story immediately. If we did, I doubt anyone had a satisfying explanation. The experience was so brief that there was no physical evidence. There was no photograph, no video, no sound recording. Nothing in the yard had changed. The light had left no mark on the grass or surrounding plants. All we had was the fact that both of us saw it. Over time, I have considered many ordinary explanations. A helicopter remains one of the most obvious. Police, military, rescue, or private helicopters can use powerful searchlights. If one passed at the correct angle, the beam could have illuminated us for several seconds and then moved away. The helicopter itself might have been hidden by darkness. Perhaps it was farther away than we believed, so the sound did not reach us strongly. Wind direction can also affect how sound travels. If the wind carried noise away from us, a helicopter might appear quieter than expected. The wind picking up afterward could support that explanation. Maybe the aircraft disturbed the air. Or perhaps the wind had already been moving at a higher altitude before reaching the ground. But the beam did not seem to sweep across us. It felt fixed. It appeared directly on us and then disappeared. I also cannot remember seeing the light continue anywhere else. A helicopter searchlight usually moves across the ground. Even if it paused on one location, I would expect to see the beam shift when it left. This one seemed to shut off instantly. The silence still bothers me. A plane is another possibility. Some aircraft have extremely bright landing lights that can appear almost like spotlights when seen from the correct angle. A plane moving toward us might have seemed stationary for a few seconds. Then, a turn or change in altitude could have caused the light to disappear. If there were thin clouds or moisture in the air, the light might have appeared as a visible beam rather than only a bright point. But a plane's landing light usually shines forward rather than straight down. We also should have seen movement or heard an engine eventually. The light appeared to come from directly above. A drone would be an easy explanation today. Modern drones can carry powerful lights and hover quietly compared with helicopters. Someone could have flown one over the property and aimed a light down as a joke. But I do not know whether drones were common or capable enough at the time of the experience. Even modern drones usually make a noticeable buzzing sound when they are close. If the beam was as bright as I remember, the drone would have needed a strong light and enough power to carry it. It also would have required someone nearby controlling it. Why would a stranger locate two people lying in a private yard at night, shine a spotlight directly on them, and then disappear without doing anything else? It is possible. People play strange pranks. But there was no second appearance, no laughter, and no visible operator. A security light or motion sensor is another normal possibility. Perhaps there was a powerful lamp attached to the rented house or a neighboring property. When we moved, it activated and shone downward. Because we were looking up, we may have assumed the light came from the sky. A fixed lamp could have switched off after several seconds, creating exactly the sudden disappearance we remembered. But the beam seemed too high and too vertical. We were familiar enough with the property to know where the house lights were. The light did not seem to come from a roof, pole, or nearby building. It surrounded us from above. The source felt distant. Still, perception at night is unreliable. A bright lamp can remove most visual references. Without seeing the fixture, it may appear to come from much farther away than it really does. The wind-moving branches could also have affected the light. A gap in the trees might have briefly allowed a distant lamp to shine through. When the branches shifted, the beam disappeared. That would explain why the wind and light seemed connected. Yet the light appeared before the wind became noticeable. It also seemed focused exactly on us, rather than scattered through leaves. Lightning does not fit well. There was no thunder or storm at the time. Lightning normally produces a broad flash, not a narrow spotlight that remains for several seconds. Heat lightning or distant storms can illuminate clouds silently, but again, the whole sky would brighten. What we saw was directed. A meteor or other object burning in the atmosphere could produce a bright light, but it would move across the sky rather than shine downward in one place. A satellite flare might become extremely bright for a short time, but it would look like a point of light, not a beam reaching the ground. Perhaps a powerful laser or spotlight was being used somewhere nearby. Outdoor events, farms, construction sites, or people experimenting with equipment can send lights into the sky. If mist or thin cloud reflected the beam, it might appear to come down from above. Someone could have moved the light until it briefly pointed toward the property. But we did not hear music, machinery, or activity from anywhere nearby. The area seemed quiet. Another possibility is that our eyes were affected by sudden brightness from an unseen source. If a car turned on a distant road, its headlights might have passed through a gap in the vegetation and illuminated us. Because we were lying down and looking upward, the angle could have made the light appear to descend from the sky. Then the vehicle turned again, causing it to vanish. The wind in the trees afterward might have been unrelated. This is a reasonable explanation, but the beam felt too vertical. I remember it shining down, not across the ground. Memory may have changed that detail. The experience happened quickly, and shock affects perception. My sister and I may have discussed it afterward in a way that strengthened the same interpretation. One of us may have said, "It came from the sky," and the other agreed. Over time, that description became fixed. The actual angle may have been less clear. Shared memories are not automatically perfect evidence. Two people can misinterpret the same ordinary event. If both are surprised, they may influence each other's understanding almost immediately. The first word spoken after an event can shape how both remember it. My sentence, "Nobody is going to believe this," already framed the experience as impossible. Perhaps that encouraged both of us to preserve the strangest version. Still, we did not invent the light. Something illuminated us. It was bright enough to stop our conversation. It remained for several seconds. It vanished suddenly. The question is not whether we saw light. The question is what produced it. Glastonbury itself has a reputation that can affect how people interpret unusual experiences. It is associated with old legends, spirituality, sacred sites, and stories about strange events. People visit the area for religious, mystical, and historical reasons. Knowing that could make someone more likely to interpret an unexplained light as supernatural. But we were not discussing those stories when it happened. We were not performing a ritual or visiting a supposedly haunted location. We were lying outside a rented house and looking at stars. The beam did not come with a message or vision. No figure appeared. Nothing spoke. It was only light. Some people would call it a UFO encounter. Technically, if an unidentified object or source in the sky created the beam, the term might apply. But we never saw a craft. There was no metallic shape, row of windows, or object moving overhead. We saw only the effect. Calling it extraterrestrial would go far beyond the evidence. Maybe an aircraft was there, hidden by darkness. Maybe a person aimed a spotlight from somewhere we could not see. Maybe the source was entirely ordinary. I do not know. The way the light appeared directly over us creates the unsettling possibility that we were being observed. It did not illuminate another part of the garden first. We did not see it searching across the property. It seemed to find us immediately. That could be an illusion caused by the fact that we only noticed it once it reached us. Perhaps it had been moving across the yard before that, but we were looking at the stars and did not notice the ground becoming brighter. The beam may have swept toward us normally. From our perspective, it suddenly switched on. That explanation makes sense. But the experience felt intentional. For those few seconds, I had the strong impression that something above knew exactly where we were. It is strange that I did not feel completely threatened. I was startled and confused, but I also wanted to remain outside. The light did not feel violent. It did not burn or make noise. There was no physical pain. It simply illuminated us. My sister's fear was stronger. Perhaps she sensed something I did not. Or maybe she reacted more realistically. Two people lying in a dark yard have no protection from whatever might be above them. Running inside was the safest choice. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had stayed outside alone. Would the light have returned? Would I have seen an aircraft move away? Perhaps I would have discovered a normal source within minutes. Or maybe nothing else would have happened, leaving the experience exactly as mysterious as it is now. I am glad I did not force my sister to stay. Her fear mattered more than my curiosity. The wind and rustling trees made the yard feel increasingly unsafe, and there was no good reason to remain exposed. The event has stayed with me because of its simplicity. There were no confusing details or long sequence of events. My sister and I lay outside under the stars. A silent beam shone down on us. Then it switched off. Everything before and after was ordinary. That makes it difficult to explain through dreams or hallucinations. We were both awake. We had been outside for around 10 minutes. We were talking. Neither of us had just woken from sleep or taken anything that should have affected perception. A shared hallucination is far less likely than a shared misunderstanding of a real light. There was definitely a source. We simply could not identify it. I would be interested to know whether anyone else nearby saw something that night. Perhaps another resident noticed a helicopter or a searchlight. Maybe there was a local event involving aircraft. Someone might have reported strange lights over the area. Without the exact date and time, it would be difficult to investigate now. The experience remains isolated inside our own memory. My sister is the only person who can confirm it. That is enough for me to know I did not imagine the entire thing. It is not enough to prove what caused it. The sentence I spoke after the light disappeared still feels important. Nobody is going to believe this. I did not say, "What was that?" I did not ask whether she had seen it. I already knew she had. The silence between us during the beam had been shared. We were both staring upward, both waiting for something else to happen. When the darkness returned, the problem was not convincing each other. It was imagining how the story would sound to everyone else. Even now, I can hear the silence of that moment. A bright light strong enough to surround us should have come with some sound. An engine, a click, a distant mechanical hum. Something instead. The night remained still until the beam vanished. Then the wind rose, and the trees began moving. Maybe that sequence was coincidence. The wind may have been approaching before we noticed it. The beam could have come from an ordinary aircraft traveling too far away for us to hear. Those are sensible explanations. But when I remember the experience, I do not picture a plane. I picture the night sky opening into a single column of white light. For several seconds, my sister and I were the only things inside it. Then it turned off as suddenly as it had appeared. The sky became dark again. And for a moment, before the wind moved through the trees, the entire world seemed to be waiting for us to decide whether to stay. About 35 years ago, a girlfriend and I were driving home late at night through a small town in Oklahoma. It was probably around midnight, maybe later. The roads were quiet in the way small-town roads often are after dark. There were no lines of traffic, no crowded shops, and not many houses with lights still on. Most people had gone to bed. We had been talking normally in the car. Nothing strange had happened earlier that night, and neither of us was looking for anything unusual. We were simply trying to get home. At some point, I noticed a light in the sky. At first, I thought it was a bright star. Then I looked at it again. It seemed too bright and too close. It did not look like the other lights in the sky. There was something about its position and intensity that immediately caught my attention. I pointed it out to my friend. I remember saying that it looked as though it were following us. I probably said it half jokingly at first. When you are driving at night, distant objects can seem to move with you. The moon follows the car. Stars appear to remain in the same position while the landscape changes. A bright light in the distance could create the same impression. I knew that. Still, this light felt different. Each time I checked it, it seemed to remain close to our route. It was not simply hanging in one fixed part of the sky. It appeared to be keeping pace with us. My friend looked too. She could see it. That mattered because I was not alone or half asleep. We were both awake, sitting in the same car and watching the same light. I continued driving. The road toward home was familiar. I knew every turn, intersection, and stretch of dark land along the way. When I turned onto the road where we lived, everything changed. The light was suddenly directly in front of us. There was no gradual approach. I did not watch it slowly descend from the sky. One moment, it was above and behind us. The next, it was low in front of the car. It seemed to have crossed the distance instantly. The speed was impossible to judge because it happened so quickly. It was more like a jump than normal movement. The light filled the road ahead of us. I do not remember seeing a clear craft, body, wings, or structure around it. I only remember the light. It was bright enough that it felt close and physical. Whatever it was not simply a distant star anymore. It appeared to be directly in our path. Both of us screamed. I reacted without thinking. I slammed my hand against the horn. I do not know why I thought honking would help. Maybe some part of me still believed it was another vehicle, helicopter, or person in the road. Perhaps I hoped the noise would frighten it away. I threw the car into reverse. The movement was rough and sudden. I was not checking mirrors carefully or thinking about where I was going. I only wanted distance between us and the light. My friend was screaming beside me. I was shouting too. For a few seconds, the entire world seemed reduced to the car, the horn, and that light directly ahead. Then it disappeared from the road. Again, I did not see it travel normally. It seemed to return to the sky in the blink of an eye. 1 second, it was in front of us. The next, it was high above again. That was the moment that convinced me something truly strange had happened. A helicopter could rise, but not that quickly. A plane could pass overhead, but it could not appear at road level and then return to the sky instantly. A car's headlights could approach us, but they would remain attached to a car. A flash from electrical equipment might brighten the road, but it would not become the same light we had already watched following us. I put the car back into drive. I did not stop to investigate. I did not roll down the window or step outside. I drove home as fast as I safely could. The light remained in my thoughts, even when I could no longer clearly see it. I kept looking in the mirrors. I expected it to appear behind us again. Every bright point in the sky made me nervous. When we reached the house, we rushed inside and told the people there what had happened. We were frightened and probably spoke over one another. We described the light following the car. We explained how it suddenly appeared directly in front of us after we turned onto our road. We told them I honked, reversed, and then watched it shoot back into the sky. No one believed us. They probably thought we had mistaken an ordinary light for something unusual. Maybe they assumed we were exaggerating because it was late and we were frightened. Perhaps they believed we had seen an aircraft and panicked. I understood why the story sounded unbelievable. Even while describing it, I knew how extreme it sounded. A mysterious light follows 2 young women through rural Oklahoma, suddenly drops in front of their car, then returns to the sky instantly. It sounds like something from a movie. But both of us had seen it. We had reacted at the same time. My friend's fear was real. My own reaction had been so immediate that I threw the car into reverse without thinking about what might be behind us. That was not something I invented later. The fear happened in the moment. For years afterward, I tried to find a normal explanation. The easiest one was a helicopter. A helicopter can hover. It can carry an extremely bright searchlight. At night, the aircraft itself may be difficult to see while the light remains obvious. If a helicopter had been flying near us, perhaps we only saw its light. It could have moved from behind the car to the road ahead. Then it might have climbed quickly when I honked or reversed. That explanation covers some parts of the experience. But I do not remember hearing helicopter blades. A helicopter at low altitude would be loud. The sound should have been impossible to miss, especially on a quiet road after midnight. We should have felt the air or heard the heavy chopping of the rotor. I remember neither. The movement also seemed much faster than any helicopter could manage. It did not fly around us in a visible arc. It appeared. Then it disappeared. Maybe the distance confused me. If the light was farther away than I believed, a small movement could have made it seem to jump. Without buildings, trees, or other clear references, judging distance at night is difficult. A bright light can look close when it is actually miles away. Perhaps the light never descended to the road at all. Maybe the road rose toward a hill, causing a distant aircraft to line up directly in front of us. When I reversed, the angle changed, making it appear to return to the sky. That is possible. A road can change perspective more dramatically than a driver notices. If we turned onto an incline, the light might suddenly appear low over the pavement. Then, backing away could raise it above the horizon again. But I remember it feeling much closer than that. It did not look like a distant light at the end of the road. It looked like something directly in front of us. Another explanation is an airplane. A plane approaching head-on can appear almost motionless because it is traveling directly toward the viewer. Its landing lights can look like one bright point. As the angle changes, it may suddenly seem to move quickly. If the plane turned or passed above us, the light could shift from the road to the sky. Maybe we saw an aircraft preparing to land somewhere nearby. The problem is that I do not remember any airport in the immediate area that would explain such a low approach. A plane should also have shown navigation lights or some visible shape once it was close. I did not see wings. I did not hear an engine. And it seemed to move from a high position to directly in front of us far too quickly. I have also considered a blown transformer. Maybe the light following us was an aircraft or bright star, while the sudden light in front of the car came from electrical equipment failing near the road. A transformer explosion can produce a powerful flash. It may look blue, white, or green and illuminate a wide area. The explosion could have frightened us so badly that we connected it to the light we had already noticed. Then, after the flash ended, we looked up and saw the original light in the sky again. That would create the impression that one object had moved from the sky to the road and back. This is one of the more reasonable explanations I have given myself. It allows two ordinary events to combine into one frightening memory. A distant aircraft follows the same general route. A transformer blows near the road. The flash disappears. The aircraft remains above. In the panic, my friend and I interpret both lights as the same thing. But I do not remember an explosion. There was no loud electrical bang, no shower of sparks, no power outage that I recall. The light in front of us did not seem to come from a pole or roadside equipment. It seemed suspended in the road. I have considered headlights, too. Maybe a vehicle came over a hill or around a curve and briefly pointed its high beams directly at us. The glare could have hidden the car itself. When I reversed, the other driver may have turned away, making the lights disappear. Then we saw the original object in the sky again and connected the two. But there was no sound of another engine. No car passed us. No vehicle turned around. The road ahead appeared empty after the light vanished. A person using a powerful spotlight is another possibility. Someone might have been standing in a field or parked off the road, shining a light toward us. They could have moved the beam quickly, creating the appearance that it had jumped from the sky. People do strange things, especially in rural areas. A spotlight can be used for hunting or searching land at night. If the beam hit dust, fog, or moisture in the air, it might appear like a glowing object rather than a simple circle of light. Still, I do not remember a visible beam connecting it to the ground. The light seemed independent. Weather could also have played a role. Ball lightning is sometimes described as a glowing sphere that moves unpredictably near the ground. It can appear during storms, though I do not remember bad weather that night. Reports describe balls of light floating, moving rapidly, entering buildings and disappearing suddenly. Scientists still debate some aspects of the phenomenon. Maybe we saw something atmospheric rather than mechanical. That explanation would account for the lack of sound and visible structure. But I do not know whether ball lightning can move from the sky to the road and back at the speed we witnessed. It also usually does not appear to follow a vehicle for any distance. Perhaps it was only following us in the same way the moon seems to follow a car. Maybe the entire experience was created by perspective. That is the explanation I return to most often. The light was distant. The road curved and changed elevation. Our own movement made the light appear to move. When we turned, the angle placed it directly ahead. We panicked. Then the road or car position changed again, and the light appeared high in the sky. No object traveled at impossible speed. Only our viewpoint changed. This explanation makes sense on paper. It does not match the memory. The light did not seem distant when it was in front of us. It felt immediate and close enough to block our route. I honked because I believed something was physically there. I reversed because I thought we were about to hit it, or that it was approaching us. My friend reacted the same way. If only one of us had seen it, I would doubt myself more. Two people can misinterpret the same thing, especially when one person's fear influences the other. I may have shouted that the light was in front of us, causing my friend to panic before she examined it clearly. Or she may have screamed first, increasing my fear. Memory does not preserve the exact order of every reaction. Still, she saw enough to understand why I reversed. She did not tell me later that I had imagined it. At the house, we told the same basic story. The experience was shared. That is why I have never fully accepted that it was only in my mind. Being tired might have affected us. It was after midnight. Night driving can create visual illusions, especially on empty roads. The eyes become focused on darkness, and bright lights appear larger. Fatigue slows thinking and affects distance judgment. A reflection on the windshield could have appeared outside the car. Dashboard lights, headlights from behind, or something inside the vehicle might have reflected in the glass. As we turned, the reflection could have shifted suddenly into the center of our view. When I reversed, it moved again and appeared higher. Windshield reflections can look surprisingly solid at night. Maybe that was all it was. But I remember the light being outside, not on the glass. I had watched it in the sky before the turn. It had an existence separate from the car. The jump in front of us felt like movement through open space. Over the years, I have offered myself many explanations. A helicopter, an airplane, a transformer, a vehicle, a spotlight, an atmospheric event, a reflection, a trick of perspective. Any one of them might be correct. The problem is that I do not believe any of them completely. Each explanation covers one part, but fails somewhere else. The helicopter explains hovering, but not the silence or speed. The plane explains a bright light, but not the sudden low position. The transformer explains a flash, but not its connection to the light in the sky. The reflection explains movement, but not why both of us experienced it as something outside. Perspective explains the jump, but not how close it seemed. Maybe memory has changed the event. 35 years is a long time. I have thought about that night many times. Each time I replay it, certain details may become stronger while others disappear. The light may not have traveled as far or as quickly as I now remember. Perhaps it did not appear directly at ground level. Maybe it remained higher above the road. My fear may have compressed the sequence into one instant. What felt like a blink could have lasted several seconds. The object might have moved normally, but panic made it seem impossible. I know memory is not a recording. It changes. But the main image remains the same. A bright light in the sky. The feeling that it was following us. The turn onto our road. Then the light suddenly filling the space ahead. The horn under my hand. The car jerking backward. Both of us screaming. Then the light high in the sky again. That sequence has never left me. I still become nervous when I drive alone late at night. The fear is not constant, but it returns on dark, rural roads. If I notice a bright light in the sky, I watch it carefully. I check whether it moves with me. I compare it to stars, towers, and aircraft. I look away and then back to see whether its position has changed. Part of me expects it to appear in front of the car again. I know that is unlikely. Nothing similar has happened in all the years since. That should reassure me. Instead, it makes the event feel even more isolated and impossible to test. If it happened repeatedly, I might discover a pattern. Maybe a certain road angle creates the illusion. Perhaps aircraft regularly approach from that direction. But one event gives me nothing to compare. I cannot return to the exact moment. The road may have changed. Buildings, poles, and lights may exist there now that did not exist then. Even if I drove the same route at midnight, the sky would not be the same. I also do not talk about it much. After the people at the house did not believe us, I learned that telling the story rarely helped. Some people laughed. Others immediately gave explanations without listening to how the light moved. I understand their reaction. I would probably search for ordinary answers, too. Claims about unexplained lights are common, and most turn out to be aircraft, satellites, planets, drones, or atmospheric effects. People misjudge distance all the time. I do not expect anyone to accept that we saw something beyond normal explanation simply because I remember it strongly. I cannot prove what it was. I do not have a photograph. There were no phones capable of recording easily in those days. Even if we had a camera, the event happened too quickly for us to use it. There was no physical evidence on the car, no mark on the road, no report from another witness that I know about. Only my friend and me. I have lost touch with many people from that time, and I do not know how clearly she remembers the event now. I sometimes wonder whether she still watches the sky, too. Perhaps she accepted a normal explanation years ago. Maybe her memory has changed differently from mine. I would be curious to hear her version without reminding her of the details first. If she still described the same sudden movement, it would strengthen my confidence that the memory is accurate. If her story differed, I would have to question my own version more seriously. For now, I can only tell what I remember. I do not know whether the light was connected to aliens or a spacecraft. I never saw beings. I never saw a metallic object. There was no missing time, strange mark, or message. Calling it a UFO would only mean that it was an unidentified light in the sky. That description is accurate. It was there. It moved in a way I could not understand. Then, it was gone. Sometimes I think the scariest possibility is not that it came from somewhere else. The scariest possibility is that it was something ordinary, and my senses could be so completely wrong. If a plane, reflection, or transformer could appear to break the rules of movement that clearly, then vision is much less trustworthy than it feels. Two people can see the same thing, scream at the same time, and still misunderstand it. That possibility is unsettling. But the other possibility is worse. Maybe we saw exactly what we thought we saw. Maybe something noticed our car and followed us. When we turned onto the road home, it moved directly in front of us. It remained there until I honked and reversed. Then it returned to the sky so quickly that no normal aircraft could have done it. If that is true, I do not know why it approached. Maybe it was only observing. Perhaps it responded to our movement or sound. Maybe the horn startled it. Or maybe it had no interest in us at all, and our road happened to cross its path. There is no way to know. I have spent decades trying to turn the experience into something reasonable. Some nights I can convince myself it was a helicopter. Other times, I decide it was a distant plane combined with a transformer flash. I tell myself the road angle created an illusion. I remind myself that fear changes memory. Those explanations help until I remember how the light moved. It did not slowly descend. It did not pass us. It was in the sky, and then it was directly ahead. When it left, it did not climb. It was simply above us again. The entire movement seemed to happen in less time than it takes to blink. That is why I still watch for strange lights. I do not expect to see the same one. I hope I never do. But on quiet roads, after midnight, when there are no other cars and the sky is completely dark, I still look up. I notice every light that seems too bright. I check whether it remains behind me after I turn, and no matter how many ordinary explanations I have given myself over the years, I still feel the same fear when one seems to follow. Because I remember the last time I ignored that feeling. I turned onto the road home, and the light that had been in the sky was suddenly waiting in front of us. Here is the full rewrite, kept close to the original experience while strengthening the mirror encounter, the feeling of being pursued, and the relief that came only after your sister entered the house. I was home alone when it happened. It was fairly early in the morning, and everyone else had already left for work. The house was quiet in the ordinary way it usually was when no one else was there. I was not expecting anything unusual. I went into the bathroom, turned on some music, and started taking a shower. The hot water filled the room with steam. The mirror directly across from the shower slowly became covered in fog, and the music made it difficult to hear anything happening elsewhere in the house. At first, I felt completely normal. Then, without any obvious reason, I got the feeling that I was not alone. It was sudden. I had not heard a door open. There were no footsteps outside the bathroom. No object fell or moved. Nothing had happened that should have frightened me. But I became certain that someone else was inside the house. The feeling was not simply nervousness. It was more like my body noticed something before my mind did. The muscles in my shoulders tightened. I became aware of the bathroom door and the empty rooms beyond it. Even with the music playing, I felt as though someone might be standing outside and listening. I stopped the music. The bathroom became much quieter. The water continued running, striking the floor of the shower and echoing around the tiled room. I stood still and listened. At first, I heard nothing except the water. I waited. I thought maybe someone from my family had returned home early. If they had entered, I expected to hear keys, a door closing, footsteps, or someone calling my name. Nothing came. I turned the water down slightly so I could listen more carefully. The rest of the house remained silent. I stayed like that for several minutes. 5 minutes may not sound long, but standing quietly in a shower while believing someone may be inside the house makes time move slowly. I listened for the smallest sound. A floorboard, a cabinet, breathing outside the door. There was nothing. Eventually, I told myself I was being ridiculous. No one had come home. The doors were locked. The house was empty. Maybe the music had made me imagine a sound. Perhaps being alone had simply made me more alert than usual. I turned the music back on or continued showering without it. I do not remember exactly which, but I tried to return to normal. For a short time, the feeling weakened. Then it came back much stronger. It was as though something had moved closer. My stomach suddenly began to hurt. My heart started racing so hard that I could feel it pounding through my chest. My hands shook. The fear arrived before I had any idea what I was afraid of. There was still no visible person, no sound, no movement. But every part of my body reacted as if I were in immediate danger. I had the strong sensation that something was watching me, not from outside the bathroom, from inside it. The feeling became unbearable. I opened the shower door. The mirror was directly in front of me. Steam had covered most of the glass, but the reflection was still visible through the fog. I looked at myself. At least, the person in the mirror looked like me. It had my face, my hair, and my body. The reflection moved when I moved. There was no obvious difference that I could point to. But something felt wrong. I did not feel like I was looking at my own reflection. I felt as though I was looking at someone pretending to be me. It is difficult to explain because nothing visibly changed. The face in the mirror was mine, yet I could not emotionally recognize it as myself. There was a strange distance between me and the reflection, as though the mirror was not showing what stood in front of it. It felt like something on the other side was wearing my appearance and looking back. I stared. The steam moved slowly across the glass. Drops of water gathered and ran down through the fog, briefly clearing narrow paths through my reflection. Every time a section became clearer, I expected the face to change. I thought I might see different eyes or an expression I was not making. That did not happen. The reflection remained still when I remained still. But the feeling became worse. My heart was beating so hard that my entire body shook. I wanted to turn away. I could not. I felt locked in place. I do not know how long I stood there staring at the mirror. It may have been only a few seconds. It felt much longer. The bathroom seemed to disappear around me. The running water, steam, walls, and door became less important. All that remained was my face in the glass, and the certainty that it did not belong to me. I have always had a complicated relationship with mirrors. When I was a child, I hated them. I did not like looking into them at night or seeing reflections from across a dark room. There was something unsettling about watching a copy of myself move inside a flat surface. As I became older, that fear mostly disappeared. Mirrors became normal objects. I used them every day without thinking. That morning brought the old fear back immediately. It felt as if the reason I had hated mirrors as a child had finally shown itself. I wondered whether the reflection would move after I stopped. I imagined lifting my hand and seeing the other version wait a second before copying me. I imagined turning away while it continued staring. The thoughts made the panic worse. I knew I had to leave the bathroom. Still, I could not break eye contact. It felt dangerous to look away. If something really was inside the mirror, perhaps turning my back would allow it to come closer. That idea was irrational. But fear does not need logic. Eventually, I broke out of the daze. I moved suddenly, as though my body had finally released itself. I stepped out of the shower and ran. I did not stop to grab clothes or a towel properly. I left the bathroom without anything on and rushed toward my bedroom. There were other mirrors between the bathroom and my room. I avoided looking at every one of them. I kept my head turned or my eyes lowered as I passed. I was terrified that I would see the same wrong reflection in another mirror. Worse, I feared I might see something standing behind me. As I ran, I felt as though I was being chased. I did not hear footsteps. Nothing touched me. But the feeling of a presence followed closely behind. My body expected something to reach out at any moment. I ran faster. When I reached my bedroom, I slammed the door and locked it if there was a lock. There were mirrors inside the room, too. I immediately covered them. I used whatever I could find, clothes, blankets, or other objects, because I could not stand the thought of seeing my reflection again. Once the mirrors were hidden, I sat down and tried to breathe. I was nearly crying. The panic did not disappear just because I had left the bathroom. I still felt unsafe. The house was too quiet. I imagined something standing outside my bedroom door, waiting for me to look out. I did not want to remain alone. I called my sister. I tried to explain what had happened, but I was so frightened that I probably did not make much sense. I told her I felt like someone or something was inside the house. I asked her to come over. She could hear how upset I was and agreed. I stayed in my room until she arrived. I listened for the front door. Every small sound made me tense. The house settled. Water may still have been running or dripping in the bathroom. Pipes moved inside the walls. Each noise felt like evidence that the presence had followed me out of the mirror. When my sister reached the house, she did not immediately call for me. She checked the rooms first. She looked through the house to make sure no person had entered. I remained upstairs or inside my room, waiting. Eventually, she called my name and told me everything was clear. No one was inside. The doors and windows did not show signs of a break-in. Nothing had been moved. There was no stranger hiding in the bathroom, hallway, or downstairs rooms. I came out and went downstairs. The moment I was no longer alone, the feeling disappeared. It did not slowly weaken. The house simply felt normal again. The pressure in my stomach eased. My heart stopped racing. The sensation of being watched was gone. The mirrors became ordinary pieces of glass again, though I still did not want to look into them immediately. That sudden change disturbed me. If the panic came only from my imagination, why did it stop so completely when my sister arrived? The obvious answer is that her presence made me feel safe. Fear is often strongest when someone is alone. Once another person enters the house, the brain no longer feels responsible for watching every doorway and sound. My nervous system may have relaxed because I knew someone else was there. That makes sense. But at the time, it felt as though whatever had been watching me left because I was no longer alone. I tried to explain the experience to my sister. I told her that I had looked into the mirror and recognized my reflection, but it did not feel like me. She may have thought I had experienced a panic attack. That is possible. A sudden panic attack can cause a racing heart, shaking, stomach pain, fear, and a sense that something terrible is about to happen. It can begin without a clear trigger. The physical symptoms can become so intense that the person believes they are in immediate danger. The more frightened they become by the symptoms, the stronger the panic grows. Maybe the first feeling of being watched started the cycle. I stopped the music and listened. The silence made me more alert. When I found no explanation, my mind became more anxious rather than less. Then the racing heart and stomach pain convinced me something was truly wrong. Looking into a fogged mirror while panicking could have made my own face appear unfamiliar. There is also a psychological experience called depersonalization or derealization. During intense stress or panic, a person may feel disconnected from their own body, face, or surroundings. They can look in a mirror and intellectually know the reflection is theirs, while emotionally feeling that it belongs to someone else. The world may seem unreal, distant, or dreamlike. That description fits what happened. I saw myself. I knew it was my reflection. But I did not feel connected to it. Perhaps there was no entity in the mirror. My brain was experiencing a temporary disconnection caused by fear. The steam may have contributed. A fogged mirror distorts the face. Water running down the glass changes the shape of the features. Low contrast and shifting steam can make a familiar reflection look slightly wrong. The brain is very sensitive to faces. Even a small difference can feel deeply unsettling. My eyes, nose, and mouth may have appeared to move or change as the fog cleared unevenly. I might not have consciously noticed the distortion, but my mind interpreted it as another person looking back. The hot shower could also have affected me physically. Heat can cause lightheadedness, a rapid heartbeat, and weakness. Standing in steam for too long may lower blood pressure or make breathing feel difficult. If I became overheated, my body may have reacted with panic. The stomach pain and shaking could have followed. Opening the shower door suddenly exposed me to cooler air and a distorted reflection at the exact moment I was most anxious. That combination might explain everything. There may also have been a sound elsewhere in the house that I did not consciously identify. Pipes can knock when hot water runs. Walls expand. Heating systems turn on. An animal may move outside or inside part of the building. The music could have hidden the original sound while still allowing my brain to register that something had changed. I sensed that I was not alone because a quiet noise suggested movement. When I stopped the music, the sound had already ended. Without an explanation, my imagination filled the silence. Another possibility is that I frightened myself because of my childhood fear of mirrors. Even though I believed I had outgrown it, the fear may have remained beneath the surface. Being alone, exposed, and surrounded by steam placed me in a vulnerable state. The mirror was directly across from the shower. Once I looked into it while panicking, the old fear returned stronger than before. The experience may have had nothing to do with the house. It could have happened in any bathroom under the same conditions. That is the rational explanation I prefer. It means there was no demon or spirit watching me. There was only fear, heat, isolation, and a distorted reflection. But the experience did not feel like fear created the presence. It felt like the presence created the fear. The order matters in my memory. I did not first become nervous about the mirror and then imagine something watching me. I felt watched before I looked at the glass. The physical symptoms became intense before I opened the shower door. The mirror seemed to confirm something my body had already sensed. That is what makes the memory difficult to dismiss. I also remember the certainty that I needed to leave. My reaction was not simply discomfort with my appearance. I believed I was in danger. I ran through the house without clothes. I covered every mirror in my bedroom. I called my sister close to tears. Those are extreme actions. A panic attack can absolutely produce them, but at the time, they felt like survival. I have wondered whether the reflection actually did something unusual that I later forgot. Maybe its eyes moved slightly before mine. Perhaps the expression was different. If that had happened clearly, I believe I would remember it. The fact that I cannot identify any visible change supports the psychological explanation. Nothing in the mirror broke the laws of reality. The wrongness came from a feeling. Still, feelings can be powerful. There was a moment when the person in the glass no longer seemed connected to my movements, even though I could see that it was copying me. It felt conscious in a way a reflection should not. I had the impression that something was looking out through my face. That is the closest I can come to explaining it. The experience is not repeated. I have not seen unfamiliar reflections in other mirrors. I have not felt chased through the house again. No one else reported anything strange that day. There were no later signs of a haunting. Nothing appeared in photographs or moved by itself. This remains the only event in my life that I would seriously describe as possibly paranormal. That makes a one-time panic or dissociative episode much more likely than a supernatural presence. If something lived in the house or inside the mirror, I would expect it to return. Maybe it would appear to another family member. Perhaps the mirrors would continue causing unusual experiences. None of that happened. But one event can still leave a permanent effect. For a while afterward, I was cautious around mirrors when I was alone. I did not stare into them in dark rooms. I avoided looking too closely at my own face when I was tired. If a mirror was fogged after a shower, I wiped it quickly or looked away. I did not want to feel that separation again. Even now, I understand why mirrors appear in so many frightening stories. They show us something familiar but reversed. They copy everything we do without being alive. Most of the time, the brain accepts that without question. But once a reflection feels even slightly independent, the entire object becomes unsettling. You begin waiting for it to make a mistake. A delayed movement, a different expression. Eyes that remain fixed while you turn away. Nothing like that visibly happened to me. Yet for those few moments, I was certain the thing in the mirror was not simply an image. I sometimes wonder whether the fear would have ended if I had stayed. Maybe I would have calmed down and recognized myself again. The steam would have cleared. My heart rate would have slowed. The bathroom would have returned to normal. Running may have strengthened the memory because I never remained long enough to prove there was no danger. On the other hand, I am glad I left. Every instinct told me to get away. Even if the cause was only panic, leaving the bathroom and calling someone helped me feel safe. I do not regret trusting that instinct. I cannot say I saw a demon. I did not see horns, claws, or a separate figure standing behind me. I saw my own face. That is what makes the experience so difficult to describe. There was no monster I could point to. The terror came from the certainty that the reflection was not me, even though it looked exactly like me. Maybe I was overheated. Maybe I experienced depersonalization. Maybe an old childhood fear returned during a panic attack. Those explanations are reasonable. They are probably more likely than anything paranormal. But I still remember how the feeling began before I looked into the mirror. I remember the sudden pain in my stomach, my heart pounding hard enough to shake me. The silence of the house, the fogged glass, and my own face staring back with nothing visibly wrong. I remember breaking free from the stare and running as though something were directly behind me. I remember covering the mirrors and waiting for my sister. Then she entered the house, checked every room, and called my name. I went downstairs. The fear was gone. Maybe her presence calmed my mind. Or maybe whatever had been watching understood that I was no longer alone. I will probably never know. It was the only experience I have ever had that felt truly paranormal. Nothing appeared clearly enough for me to prove it. Nothing left a mark. There was only a feeling strong enough to make me run from my own reflection. And sometimes I still think about the few seconds before I escaped the bathroom. I was looking into the mirror. The person staring back had my face. But somewhere deep inside me, I was completely certain that I was no longer the only one using it.
Quick pause, then we're right back. A lot of people watch one story and leave, but some stick around. They hit subscribe and come back every night. If you want to be one of them, the button's right there. Turn on the bell too, so you never miss a new one. That's it. Let's get back to the story.
When I was younger, probably around 7 or 8 years old, I had the same dream over and over again. I am 18 now and preparing to leave for university. I am not a superstitious person, and I do not normally believe that dreams carry warnings or that strange experiences automatically have a paranormal cause. Still, this is one part of my childhood that I have never been able to explain comfortably. The dream began when I was very young. I would be lying in my bed in our old house, facing the far side of my bedroom. Everything looked exactly as it did in real life. The same furniture was in the same places. The walls, door, and shadows all looked familiar. At the end of my bed stood a dark figure. I could never see its face. It looked human in general shape, but it was covered in shadow. There were no clear eyes, mouth, clothes, or features that could help me identify it. I only knew that it was male. I cannot explain how I knew that. The figure never introduced itself or spoke to me. It was simply the feeling I had whenever I saw it. He would stand at the far side of the room and watch me. I was always facing him, and I could not move. My body felt completely trapped. I could see the figure, understand where I was, and feel the fear building inside me. But I could not sit up, turn away, or pull the covers over my head. I could not scream for my parents. I could not even move my hands. It was as though the dream began after I had already been pinned in place. The figure never needed to touch me. His presence alone seemed to control my body. Sometimes he held a goldfish. That detail is one of the strangest parts of the dream. When I was young, I had always wanted a goldfish. It was something simple and harmless that I associated with happiness. The figure seemed to know that. He would stand at the end of the bed, holding the fish as if he were offering it to me. I do not remember seeing a bowl every time. Sometimes the image was unclear, but I could tell that a goldfish was connected to him. It should have made the dream less frightening. Instead, it made the figure feel more personal. It was not simply a random shadow created by a child's imagination. It seemed to know something I wanted. The goldfish felt like bait. I had the impression that if I could only move toward him, he might give it to me. But I never trusted him enough to want that. I only wanted to escape. The dream repeated for years. I cannot say how often it happened. It may not have been every night, but it happened enough that it became the main dream I remembered from childhood. Other dreams faded quickly after waking. This one stayed. Every time it returned, the setting was the same. I was in the old bedroom. The figure stood at the far end. I was unable to move. Sometimes he had the goldfish. Sometimes he only watched. The dream rarely changed. That consistency made it feel less like an ordinary nightmare. Most dreams are chaotic. Rooms change shape. People become other people. Events happen without logic. This dream had rules. The figure remained in the same place. I remained trapped. The room remained familiar. I would wake, frightened, relieved that I could move again. Then life continued normally. I did not see the figure while awake. Nothing stood at the end of my bed during the day. There was no evidence that anyone had entered my room. I understood that it was a dream, even if it felt unusually real. Eventually, my family moved to a new house. Moving day was stressful and exciting. Boxes were everywhere, rooms were being emptied, and the place where I had spent most of my childhood was no longer going to be ours. I did not think about the recurring dream during the move, but that night, the dream returned. For the first time, something changed. I was back in the old bedroom again. The shadowy figure stood at the end of my bed. Everything began the same way it always did. I looked toward him and felt the familiar fear. Then, I realized I could move. My body was no longer trapped. I sat up. The figure remained in the room, but he could not hold me there. I got out of bed and ran. I left the bedroom and entered the hallway. My whole family was there. Seeing them gave me an immediate sense of relief. I was no longer alone with the figure. I had escaped from the room. For years, the dream had ended with me helpless in bed. Now, on the day we left the old house, I was finally free. At least, that was what I thought. The timing felt meaningful. We had moved away from the place where the dream always occurred, and the dream changed on the same day. It was as though leaving the house had broken whatever control the figure held over me. I believed the dream was finished. For the next few weeks, I slept normally. I did not see the figure. The new bedroom began to feel familiar, and the old house slowly became part of the past. Then, the dream came back. The setting had not changed to the new house. I was back in the old bedroom again. The figure was still there. This time, he did not remain at the far side of the room. He came closer. I was unable to move again. The freedom from the moving daydream was gone. I could only watch while he approached the bed. He moved close to my face. I still could not see clear features, but his shadow filled my vision. The distance that had always existed between us disappeared. Before he could do anything else, I woke up. I was in the new house. My new bedroom was quiet. Nothing stood beside the bed. But the dream left me deeply unsettled. It felt like the figure had followed me. The first changed dream had made me believe that moving away had allowed me to escape. The second seemed to correct that belief. The old house might be gone, but the figure still had access to me. Later that day, something happened while I was awake. I was walking through the house near my younger sister's bedroom. I was only a few feet from her door. There was no shadow figure in front of me. I had not just woken from sleep. I was moving normally through the house. Then, I collapsed. My body stopped responding. I fell to the floor and could not get back up. I was completely conscious. I knew where I was. I knew my sister was nearby in her room. I tried to call her. No sound came out. I tried moving an arm or leg. Nothing worked. I could not drag myself toward the doorway. I could not knock against the wall. I could not do anything that might get her attention. The helplessness felt exactly like the dream. That was what frightened me most. For years, I had experienced the same inability to move while the figure watched from the end of my bed. Now I was awake, lying on the floor in a new house, and my body had become trapped in the same way. My sister was close enough that she might have helped if she noticed me. But I could not make her notice. I do not know exactly how long the episode lasted. It felt like several minutes. Time moves slowly when you are conscious but unable to control your body. I kept trying to force some part of myself to move. A finger, my mouth, my head. Nothing responded. There was no visible figure in the hallway. I did not see the shadow man standing over me. But I felt the connection to the dream immediately. It was as if the figure did not need to appear anymore. He could still take away my movement. Eventually, the paralysis ended. There was no dramatic release. My body simply began responding again. I pushed myself up from the floor. My sister still had not noticed what happened. I did not go to her for help. I did not immediately tell my parents. I returned to my bedroom and sat there for a while, trying to understand what had happened. I was frightened and confused. Part of me believed I had experienced a medical problem. Maybe I fainted without fully losing consciousness. Perhaps my blood pressure dropped, or something caused my muscles to stop working temporarily. Another part of me could not ignore the dream from the previous night. The figure had come closer than ever before. Then, while I was awake, I lost control of my body. It felt like a demonstration, as though the figure wanted me to understand that moving houses had not freed me. A few days later, the dream returned again. I do not remember every detail, but the shadow figure was there. Soon afterward, the waking paralysis happened a second time. Again, I was unable to move or call for help. Again, it ended without a clear explanation. The two waking episodes did not become a regular part of my life. They happened close together after the dream returned in the new house. Then, they stopped. The recurring dream also ended. I have not seen the figure since. That should have brought complete relief. Instead, the fact that it stopped so suddenly made the entire experience feel even stranger. For years, the figure had appeared in the same dream. Then, we moved. The dream changed and allowed me to escape. A few weeks later, the figure returned, came close to me, and was followed by 2 episodes of paralysis while I was fully awake. Then, everything ended. It felt like a final warning, as if the figure wanted me to know that leaving the old house had not been my decision to escape. He still had control. He simply chose not to use it again. I understand there are ordinary explanations. The recurring childhood dream may have been connected to sleep paralysis. During certain stages of sleep, the brain prevents the body from moving so that people do not physically act out dreams. Sometimes the mind becomes aware before that paralysis ends. A person can see the real room, feel trapped, and experience hallucinations. Shadowy figures at the end of the bed are commonly reported during sleep paralysis. The figure may have been my brain's way of explaining why I could not move. The goldfish could have come from a simple childhood desire. I wanted one, so my mind placed it inside the dream. The figure holding it may have represented both temptation and fear. The dream repeating in the same bedroom also makes sense. That was where I slept every night. When the same sleep disturbance occurred, my brain recreated the same environment. The dream changing on moving day could have been psychological. I knew we were leaving the old house. Even if I was not consciously thinking about the nightmare, moving represented escape and change. So, for the first time, I was able to run from the room. Seeing my family in the hallway may have reflected the safety I associated with moving together. The later return of the dream could have come from anxiety about the new house. Moving can be stressful for a child. I may have felt uncertain, unsettled, or afraid that familiar problems would follow me. The figure coming closer could have represented the fear returning after I believed it was over. Those explanations are reasonable. The waking collapses are more difficult. They did not happen while I was lying in bed. I was not falling asleep or waking up. I was walking near my sister's room. Sleep paralysis should not cause someone who is fully awake and standing to collapse while remaining conscious. There are medical conditions that can cause sudden weakness or temporary paralysis. A drop in blood pressure could make a person fall. A seizure can affect movement and awareness. Certain neurological conditions can produce brief episodes where someone cannot move or speak. Cataplexy can cause sudden muscle weakness, though it is often connected to strong emotions. Stress and panic can also produce physical symptoms that feel uncontrollable. I was young and may not have understood what my body was doing. It is possible I fainted, but experienced the event as continuous. Maybe I lost awareness briefly, and later filled in the missing period with the feeling of being trapped. The episode may also have lasted much less time than I remember. A few seconds of weakness can feel much longer when someone is frightened, because I had experienced the dream the previous night. I may have interpreted an unrelated physical problem as proof that the figure still controlled me. That could explain the connection without requiring anything paranormal. Still, I remember being conscious. I remember knowing my sister was nearby. I remember trying repeatedly to make a sound. I remember the frustration of being unable to get her attention. If it was a medical event, it was terrifying enough on its own. The second episode makes coincidence feel less satisfying, but repeated physical symptoms can also happen for ordinary reasons. Perhaps I was ill, exhausted, dehydrated, or under stress during those days. Then, whatever caused it passed. Because I never experienced it again, there was no opportunity to investigate a pattern. I did not tell many people. At that age, I did not know how to explain it without sounding ridiculous. I would have needed to begin with years of recurring dreams about a shadow man holding a goldfish. Then I would have to explain that after moving houses, the dream changed and the figure seemed to follow me. Finally, I would need to admit that I collapsed twice while awake and believed the dream figure was responsible. I expected adults to dismiss everything as imagination. Maybe they would have been right. I wish I had told someone about the waking paralysis. Even if the cause was not paranormal, sudden inability to move or speak can be medically important. At the time, I only sat alone in my bedroom and waited for the fear to pass. Now, years later, I can examine the story more calmly. The dream may have been a recurring sleep disturbance. The goldfish may have been a symbol created from something I wanted. The change on moving day may have reflected my own hope of leaving the dream behind. The waking episodes may have been physical or neurological events that happened near the same time by coincidence. The figure did not need to be real. That is the explanation I prefer. But the emotional sequence still feels deliberate. The figure controlled me for years. I moved away and escaped once. Then it returned, came closer, and the paralysis crossed from dreams into waking life. After proving that it could still reach me, it disappeared. I know how that sounds. It sounds like I built a story around unrelated childhood experiences. Human beings naturally search for patterns. When two frightening events occur near each other, we connect them. The dream created a framework through which I understood the collapse. If I had never dreamed of the shadow figure, I might have treated the episode as a medical problem. Because the dream came first, I felt that something was exercising control. That interpretation may have made the memory more frightening over time. Even so, I have never forgotten the feeling. In the dream, the figure stood at the end of the bed, holding something I wanted while making sure I could not reach it. When we moved, I believed I had broken free. Then he returned to show me that the old bedroom was not the source. He was. I do not believe strongly in ghosts, demons, or supernatural attachments. I am not someone who sees meaning in every nightmare. But I also cannot pretend this was an ordinary dream that happened once and faded. It repeated for years. It changed at a major moment in my life. Then it seemed to follow me into the new house. The waking paralysis happened twice and stopped at the same time the dream stopped. I have not had another experience like it for years. I have never again collapsed while conscious. The figure has not returned to my dreams. I am grateful for that. The thought of seeing him again still frightens me. If I went to sleep tonight and found myself back in the old bedroom, unable to move, I think I would panic immediately. I would know what was standing at the far end before I even saw it. I would remember the goldfish. I would remember the moving day escape. And I would remember that the last time the figure returned. The helplessness did not remain inside the dream. Sometimes I wonder why the goldfish was there. Maybe it was simply something my childhood mind wanted. Perhaps the figure represented the fear that something desirable could come from someone dangerous. Or maybe the fish had no meaning at all. Dreams combine random memories and emotions. Still, it made the figure feel intelligent. He did not only frighten me, he seemed to understand me. That was worse. I also wonder whether the first changed dream was truly an escape. Maybe the figure allowed me to run. Perhaps seeing my family in the hallway was not freedom, but another part of the same dream. The figure may have wanted me to believe moving had ended his control. Then he returned weeks later to take that belief away. That is the supernatural interpretation, and I know there is no proof for it. The psychological interpretation is much simpler. My mind created a recurring nightmare. Moving changed the dream. Anxiety brought it back. A physical episode became linked to it. Then I grew older, and the dream ended. Children often outgrow recurring nightmares. Sleep patterns change. Fear changes. The brain stops returning to the same image. That is probably what happened. But even now, when I remember lying on the floor near my sister's room, I do not think first about medicine or sleep. I remember the shadow figure close to my face in the dream from the night before. I remember trying to call for help and being unable to make a sound. I remember finally getting up and walking back to my room without telling anyone, and I remember the certainty I had as a child. Moving away had not saved me. The figure only wanted me to know that it could still make me stop. I was around 12 years old when I first saw the white lights. A couple of friends had come over for a sleepover during the summer. We originally planned to spend the night in the small clubhouse built on top of our jungle gym. At first, it seemed like a perfect idea. The clubhouse was enclosed enough to feel like our own private space, away from the adults inside the house. We carried blankets, pillows, snacks, and whatever else we thought we would need. But it was a hot summer night, and the clubhouse quickly became uncomfortable. There was barely any airflow inside. With several of us packed together, the air became warm and stuffy. It was impossible to imagine sleeping there for the entire night. Eventually, we gave up and moved to the trampoline. The trampoline stood in our backyard near a line of trees separating our property from the neighboring homes. It was not a large forest. The wooded strip was probably only 20 or 30 feet deep. But at night, it looked much larger. The trees blocked our view of the houses beyond them, and the space between the trunks became completely dark. We carried our blankets onto the trampoline and arranged ourselves beneath the open sky. The air felt much better outside. We lay there talking for hours. I do not remember everything we discussed. It was probably the usual sleepover conversation, jokes, secrets, people we knew, and stories that felt extremely important at 12 years old. None of us wanted to be the first to fall asleep. We stayed awake until sometime very late, though I have no idea exactly how late it was. At some point, one of us noticed movement near the trees. Small lights were coming out of the darkness. At first, I assumed they were fireflies. Fireflies were normal during summer, and their lights often appeared along the edge of the yard. But these did not look like fireflies. The light from a firefly usually has a green or yellow tint. It flashes, disappears, and reappears as the insect moves. These lights were pure white. They were not bluish or pale green. They looked completely white, almost like tiny stars floating close to the ground. They also seemed to remain visible rather than blinking in a normal insect pattern. More appeared between the trees. They slowly drifted out of the wooded strip and entered the backyard. All of us could see them. That was important. This was not something I noticed alone after the others fell asleep. We were awake, speaking to each other and watching the same lights. At first, we tried to remain calm. We continued suggesting fireflies because that was the only explanation that made sense. Maybe the color looked different because of the darkness. Perhaps another type of glowing insect lived in the area. But the lights kept coming closer. They did not move randomly like insects being carried by the wind. They seemed to travel together toward the house. Some moved higher while others stayed closer to the grass, but they followed the same general path across the yard. As they approached the trampoline, we became quiet. We watched them closely, waiting to see whether they would pass over us. They did not. The lights went around the trampoline. They separated enough to move along both sides, avoiding the area where we were lying. That frightened us more than anything else. If they were insects, there was no reason for all of them to avoid the trampoline so specifically. They should have drifted over the blankets, landed on the frame, or flown close to our faces. Instead, they seemed aware that we were there. They continued toward the house while forming a clear space around us. No light crossed directly over the trampoline. We huddled closer together. None of us wanted to climb down. The house was not far away, but reaching it meant leaving the trampoline and walking through the lights. We did not know whether they could hurt us. We did not know what would happen if one touched us. At 12, we did not need a detailed explanation to become terrified. We could see something behaving in a way we did not understand, and that was enough. We made a decision together. We would all remain awake until the lights disappeared. No one would be allowed to fall asleep alone. We believed there was safety in staying conscious and watching them. If something happened, at least the others would see it. We promised one another that we would keep talking and make sure everyone stayed awake. We were the kind of frightened where sleep felt impossible anyway. My heart was racing. My body was tense. I was watching the lights move around us while imagining every terrible possibility. There was no chance I would calmly close my eyes. Then morning arrived. There was no transition. I do not remember the lights disappearing. I do not remember the conversation slowing down. I do not remember deciding that it was safe to sleep. I do not remember closing my eyes. One moment, all of us were awake on the trampoline, terrified and promising that we would remain conscious together. The next moment, the sky was bright. It was morning. All of us woke at the same time, or close enough that it felt simultaneous. We looked at one another in confusion. The lights were gone. The yard looked normal. Sunlight came through the trees, and there was nothing unusual near the house or trampoline. What frightened us was that none of us remembered falling asleep. It was not simply that we had stayed up late and eventually become tired. We had been too frightened to relax. We had made a serious agreement to keep one another awake. Yet every person on the trampoline had apparently fallen asleep at nearly the same moment. No one remembered watching another person drift off. No one remembered being the last one awake. There was only a blank space between the lights and the bright morning. We talked about it immediately. Everyone remembered the white lights. Everyone remembered them coming out of the trees. Everyone remembered the way they moved around the trampoline instead of crossing over us. And everyone remembered promising to stay awake. The missing ending was the same for all of us. We told my mother what had happened. She did not believe us. From her perspective, several tired children had stayed awake too late, watched fireflies, frightened one another, and eventually fallen asleep. That was the obvious explanation. Children become exhausted during sleepovers. They insist they will stay awake all night, and then pass out without realizing it. The lights were probably insects. Our fear made them seem unusual. By morning, the story had already become something larger in our minds. I understood why she thought that. But the experience did not feel like ordinary tiredness. I had fallen asleep during conversations before. Usually there was at least a vague memory of becoming comfortable, closing my eyes, or hearing people continue talking while I drifted away. That night contained none of those things. There was terror, an agreement to remain awake, and then sunlight. The incident stayed in my memory, but nothing similar happened for several years. The trampoline remained in the backyard for a while, and I continued spending time outside. I did not see the white lights again. Eventually, the trampoline was removed. Life changed. I became older, and the childhood experience began to feel less immediate. I still believed something strange had happened, but I could accept that we had probably seen an unusual group of insects and then fallen asleep from exhaustion. 4 years after the first incident, my family was going through financial difficulties. To save money, my mother, my 2 sisters, and I moved into a small 2-bedroom guest house in the backyard. It was the kind of building some people would call a mother-in-law suite. The space was extremely cramped for 4 people. Privacy became difficult. The main house used more energy to heat and cool, so living in the smaller building helped lower the bills. but it also meant we were constantly close to one another. One summer night, I wanted to call a friend on my cell phone. This was during the time when phone plans often gave people free minutes late at night, so I waited until the right hour before making the call. Because the guest house was so small, there was nowhere inside to have a private conversation. My mother and sisters would have heard everything. I went outside. It was another warm summer night. The backyard was quiet, and I sat on a bench near the place where the trampoline had once stood. The trampoline had been gone for a long time by then, but I still knew exactly where it had been. The line of trees remained at the back of the yard. I was speaking to my friend about normal high school issues. Nothing paranormal was on my mind. At some point during the conversation, I looked away from the trees. When I looked back, the white lights were there. I recognized them immediately. There was no period of wondering whether they were fireflies. The memory of the sleepover returned all at once. They were the same pure white color. Small points of light were visible between the trees and along the edge of the yard. I felt the same fear I had experienced at 12. But I also felt something else. As I became older, I started believing I was unusually sensitive to spirits. I sometimes sensed emotions or presences that other people did not notice. I cannot prove that this was a supernatural ability. It may have been intuition, imagination, or a tendency to react strongly to certain environments. But by that age, I had experienced enough that I trusted the feelings when they appeared. Looking at the white lights, I felt that they were connected to people who had died. I did not see human faces or full figures. The impression came as an emotion rather than spoken words. The lights felt ancient, not evil, not aggressive. They seemed like the remains of people who had been gone for so long that they could no longer hold a complete human form. It felt as though each spirit had broken apart into separate points of light. I know how strange that sounds. There was no voice explaining it. The idea arrived through feeling. I sensed that the lights remembered frightening me when I was a child. They seemed sorry. The message I received was that they had not intended to hurt us. They had approached because I could sense them. They wanted to be near someone who was aware of their presence. Perhaps they had moved around the trampoline to avoid touching or overwhelming us. Maybe they had not understood how frightening they looked. Again, none of this was communicated through normal words. It felt like information entering my mind alongside emotions that did not seem to belong entirely to me. I began telling my friend on the phone about the first experience. I explained that when I was 12, several friends and I had watched the same lights come out of the trees. I described how they moved around the trampoline and how we all woke in the morning without remembering, falling asleep. While I was speaking, the lights began moving. They started emerging from the trees. I remember saying, "Oh God, they're starting to come out of the trees." What I did not know was that my phone died at that exact moment. The call disconnected, but I did not realize it. I kept talking. I assumed my friend was still listening while I stood and began walking toward the guest house. Unfortunately, the guest house was in the same direction the lights were moving. To reach safety, I had to walk closer to them. I tried to move quickly without running. The lights continued drifting from the tree line. I kept describing what I saw, still believing my friend was on the phone. In a way, that helped. Talking made me feel less alone. I believed someone else knew what was happening and would hear if I screamed or suddenly went silent. In reality, the phone had already shut off. I crossed the yard and entered the utility room connected to the guest house. From there, I moved into the main living area. The first thing I did was go to the large window facing the backyard. I looked toward the trees. The lights were gone. Nothing moved in the yard. The tree line was dark and ordinary again. My mother and sisters had not seen anything. They had been inside the entire time. From their perspective, I had simply come back into the house after talking on the phone. There were no lights bright enough to attract their attention through the windows. I eventually discovered that my phone had died. That detail frightened me. My friend had heard me say the lights were coming out of the trees, and then the call abruptly ended. From her perspective, I had described something approaching me and immediately disappeared from the line. I had continued speaking because I believed I still had contact with another person. If I had known the phone was dead while I was outside, I might have panicked. The timing felt too precise. Maybe the battery had already been low. Late-night calls could drain older phones quickly. I may not have checked the charge before going outside. The phone dying at that moment was probably coincidence. But it felt as though my connection to the outside world had been cut just as the lights began approaching. I still do not know what the lights were. Fireflies remain the most obvious explanation. Although I remembered them as pure white, insect lights can appear different depending on distance, surrounding, darkness, and individual perception. Some species produce yellowish or pale light that may look white. A group of fireflies emerging from vegetation could appear to drift together. The trampoline may have been an open, exposed space that insects naturally avoided. Air currents around the structure could have pushed them along both sides. We may have interpreted random movement as deliberate because we were frightened. All of us falling asleep is also explainable. We had stayed awake extremely late. Fear can keep people alert temporarily, but exhaustion eventually wins. Once one person became quiet, the rest may have relaxed and fallen asleep within minutes. Because we were tired, none of us formed a clear memory of that transition. Waking around the same time in the morning is not unusual when several people are sleeping outside. Sunlight, temperature, birds, or movement on the trampoline could have awakened everyone together. The experience may have been completely natural. The second sighting could also have involved insects. It happened during summer again, near the same tree line. That is exactly where fireflies would be expected. My earlier memory made me interpret their appearance as the return of the same beings. By then, I already believed I was sensitive to spirits. That belief may have influenced the emotions I felt. The idea that they were ancient human spirits could have come from my own imagination rather than from the lights. People often experience strong intuitive impressions and mistake them for communication. The brain can create meaning very quickly, especially when an event connects to a powerful childhood memory. I understand all of that. There are other possible explanations, too. Small floating seeds, dust, or insects can reflect distant lights and appear to glow white. Moisture in the air may create bright points. Someone beyond the tree line could have had decorative lights, flashlights, or equipment that appeared to move between the branches. The 20 or 30-foot wooded strip was not a true forest. There were neighboring properties on the other side. Something ordinary may have been happening in one of those yards, but the lights seemed to come toward me. They did not behave like fixed lights seen through moving leaves. They drifted independently. During the first incident, all of my friends saw them and agreed they went around the trampoline. During the second, I recognized the same movement immediately. The sense of communication is harder to discuss because it was completely personal. No one else felt it. I cannot use it as evidence that the lights were spirits. It may have been an emotional response created by memory and fear. Still, the apology felt real. The impression was not that they wanted to frighten or harm me. They were drawn to awareness. They had found a child capable of noticing them and moved closer without understanding how terrifying that would be. 4 years later, when I had become more open to sensing them, they returned. Maybe that interpretation helped me cope. Instead of viewing the lights as unknown predators, I imagined them as fragments of people who were lonely and wanted recognition. That made the second experience less threatening, though I was still frightened enough to hurry inside. I never saw the lights again after that night. At least, I have not recognized them. I still think about the missing transition during the sleepover. If it had happened only to me, I would assume I fell asleep without noticing. But all of us were terrified. All of us promised to remain awake. Then, all of us woke in bright daylight with no memory of the night ending. That does not prove missing time or supernatural influence. Group exhaustion can produce similar memories. We may have discussed the blank period so much that our separate experiences gradually became one shared story. Children influence one another easily. One person says, "I don't remember falling asleep," and everyone else realizes they do not remember either. The absence of memory begins to feel more mysterious than it really was. Yet I remember the confusion being immediate. We did not wake slowly, one by one. It seemed as though morning arrived for all of us at once. The first thing we discussed was the lights. The memory was still fresh. The fact that my mother dismissed us made us feel even more certain that something important had happened. Maybe we wanted to prove the adults wrong. That could have strengthened the story over time. I have not told many people about either incident. The experiences sound too strange, especially the second one. Saying that I saw unusual lights is one thing. Saying that I felt they were spirits whose human forms had broken apart over time sounds like something that could make people question my mental health. I do not blame anyone for being skeptical. If someone else told me the same story, I would probably ask about fireflies, exhaustion, memory, and suggestion. Those are reasonable questions. I am not claiming that my interpretation is scientific fact. I cannot prove the lights were conscious. I cannot prove they caused us to fall asleep. I cannot prove they communicated with me 4 years later. I can only describe what happened from my perspective. At 12, I watched pure white lights come out of a line of trees with several friends. They traveled toward the house, but specifically moved around the trampoline where we were lying. We became terrified and promised to stay awake together. Then we all woke in the bright morning without remembering falling asleep. 4 years later, I sat near the same area and saw the lights again. I felt that they were the remains of people who had been dead for a very long time. I sensed that they regretted frightening me and had only approached because I could perceive them. While telling my friend they were coming out of the trees, my phone died without me knowing. I walked toward the house while continuing a conversation no one could hear. When I reached the window and looked outside, every light had disappeared. Perhaps they were fireflies. Perhaps the first event was ordinary childhood fear, and the second was shaped by the memory of it. Maybe my phone battery died at an unfortunate but meaningless moment. Those explanations are possible. They may even be correct. But when I remember the lights, I do not remember insects. I remember awareness. They did not seem to wander through the yard. They moved with purpose. They avoided us when we were children, and years later they came closer when I was alone. What frightens me most is not the possibility that they were spirits. If the emotions I sensed were genuine, they were not trying to harm me. The frightening part is the gap in that first night. I remember lying on the trampoline with my friends, watching the lights surround us. I remember all of us promising we would stay awake until they were gone. Then there is nothing. No fading fear. No final conversation. No memory of closing my eyes. Only the sudden brightness of morning and every one of us waking together. 4 years later, the lights returned to the same yard. They seemed to recognize me. And when they began coming out of the trees, my phone went dead before I even realized I was alone with them. I was somewhere between 10 and 13 years old when this happened, and I can still remember the exact time I saw on the microwave afterward. It was a Monday morning around 5:30. What happened before I checked that clock still gives me chills. At the time, my bedroom was downstairs. The house was completely quiet because everyone else was asleep. It was still dark outside, and there was no reason for anyone to be moving around yet. I had been sleeping deeply. Then, without warning, it felt as though something pulled me upright. I do not mean that I slowly woke, opened my eyes, and decided to sit up. My eyes opened at the same moment my upper body lifted from the bed. It felt automatic. 1 second, I was asleep. The next, I was sitting upright and completely awake. I remained still for a few seconds, trying to understand why I had woken. There had been no alarm, no loud sound, no one had called my name. I did not remember having a nightmare. It simply felt as though some force had grabbed my attention and pulled me out of sleep because I needed to see something. Then, the light in the hallway came on. My bedroom opened toward a downstairs hallway. From my bed, I could see the light spreading along the floor and across part of the wall. I immediately assumed someone in the family had gotten up. My father occasionally used the downstairs shower, especially early in the morning. I thought he might have come down without me hearing him. But that was the first strange thing. I had not heard any footsteps. The stairs were close enough that I should have heard someone coming down. A person my father's size would not have reached the lower level silently. The floor and stairs made enough noise that I normally knew when anyone was moving through that part of the house. Still, I did not feel afraid yet. I waited for my father to appear. A shape moved into view at the end of the hallway. At first, I thought it was him. Then the figure turned toward my room. That was when I realized it was far too large. It had to be at least 6 feet 5 inches tall, possibly taller. Its shoulders were extremely broad. The outline reminded me of Arnold Schwarzenegger in the early Terminator movies. It had that same huge upper body, wide shoulders, and heavy build. But there were no details inside the shape. It was completely black, not dark clothing, not a person standing where the light did not reach. The figure itself looked like solid darkness. The hallway light was behind or near it, yet nothing became visible. I could not see a face. There were no eyes reflecting the light, no skin, no clothing, no hair. The shape blocked everything behind it, but the darkness did not behave like a normal shadow. It looked dense. It was as if someone had cut a human-shaped opening into the world and filled it with pure blackness. The figure turned into my bedroom. It moved naturally enough that I could tell it was entering the room intentionally. The movement almost looked casual. It was the way a parent might turn into a child's bedroom because they wanted to ask a question. That made it even more disturbing. The thing did not rush at me. It did not crawl or move in an obviously monstrous way. It simply rounded the corner and stopped near the foot of my bed. Then it stared at me. I could not see eyes, but I knew it was facing me. Its attention felt direct. The figure stood silently while I remained sitting upright. I was too frightened to speak. For about 30 seconds, neither of us moved. That amount of time may not sound long, but when something impossible is standing at the foot of your bed, 30 seconds feels endless. I kept waiting for my eyes to adjust. I thought maybe I would recognize my father's face or see the color of his clothes. Nothing appeared. The longer I looked, the less human the figure seemed. It had the size and outline of a person, but no visible surface. The light from the hallway did not reveal anything. It remained completely black, while everything around it was visible. I wanted to call for my dad. I wanted to ask who was there. My mouth would not open. I did not feel physically paralyzed in the same way people describe sleep paralysis, but I could not make myself move. My body seemed to understand the danger before my mind did. Every instinct told me to remain still. The figure did not raise its arms. It did not step closer. It only stood there. Then, I suddenly took a deep breath. The breath came out of nowhere, like my body had finally remembered something important. That was when I realized I had not been breathing. From the moment the figure entered my room, I had held my breath without noticing. It did not feel like I had chosen to do it. It felt as though the presence of the thing had stopped my body from working normally. My chest had become locked. I had been staring at it for what felt like half a minute without taking in any air. When I finally inhaled, my lungs filled sharply. At almost the same moment, I blinked. The figure began to fade. I watched it disappear in front of me. It did not turn and walk away. It did not step back into the hallway. The blackness slowly became less solid until I could see the room behind it. For a second, its outline remained faintly visible. Then it was gone. As soon as the figure disappeared, the hallway light switched off. The timing was exact. The light had come on before the figure appeared. It went out immediately after the figure vanished. The downstairs area became dark again. I sat in bed, listening. I expected footsteps. I thought perhaps my father really was nearby and would say something. There was only silence. I finally called out. "Hello?" No one answered. I said it again, louder. "Hello?" Still nothing. I called several times toward the hallway, hoping my father would respond from the bathroom or stairs. The house remained quiet. I got out of bed. I was frightened, but I needed to know whether someone was downstairs. I looked into the hallway. It was empty. The bathroom light was off. No water was running. There was no sign that anyone had used the shower. I checked the area where the figure had stood. Nothing was there. No coat hanging from a door. No piece of furniture that could have formed a shape. The hallway light had no reason to turn on and off by itself. I went upstairs. The kitchen was quiet and empty. I looked at the microwave clock. It was about 5:30 in the morning. That is why I remember both the day and the time so clearly. It was Monday, and the morning had barely started. I was too shaken to return downstairs. I poured myself a bowl of cereal and sat in the kitchen, trying to understand what I had seen. The ordinary routine of getting cereal helped a little. The kitchen felt safe. There were familiar objects around me, and the lights were on. I tried convincing myself that I had been dreaming. Maybe I had experienced a false awakening. Perhaps I had dreamed that I sat up, saw the hallway light, and watched the figure enter my room. Then I woke for real and walked upstairs. That would explain the impossible shape and the way it faded. But I could remember getting out of bed. I remembered checking the bathroom. I remembered the darkness of the downstairs hallway. Everything had felt continuous. There was no clear moment when a dream ended. While I sat eating, my father came down the hallway from his bedroom. He looked like someone who had just woken up. He asked why I was awake so early. I immediately asked why he had been in my room. He looked confused. I told him I had seen someone downstairs. I said the hallway light came on, and a huge figure turned into my bedroom. I explained that I assumed it was him because he sometimes used the downstairs shower. My father said he had been asleep. He had only just gotten up. He had not gone downstairs. He had not turned on the hallway light. He had not stood at the foot of my bed. I asked again because I wanted him to admit he was joking. He continued saying it was not him. He thought I had been dreaming. That was the easiest explanation for him. A child wakes early, sees something frightening, and believes it was real. My mother was not someone who believed strongly in paranormal stories either. I knew that if I told her, she would probably say the same thing. I had a bad dream. Maybe I woke in the middle of it. Perhaps a shadow looked like a person. The problem was the light. I had watched it come on by itself. It illuminated the hallway before the figure appeared. When the figure faded, the light went off. A shadow cannot turn on a light. A dream can, of course. That became the explanation I tried to accept. I must have been partly asleep. My brain used the real layout of my room and hallway to create a frightening scene. The sensation of being pulled upright could have been a sudden muscle movement while waking. People sometimes jerk awake without knowing why. I might have sat up so quickly that it felt like something else lifted me. The figure could have been a hypnopompic hallucination. Those occur when the mind wakes before dream imagery fully stops. A person can see realistic figures inside the actual room. The hallucination may remain for several seconds before fading. Shadow people are commonly reported during these experiences. Some people see a dark man beside the bed. Others see a figure in a doorway or corner. The image disappears when they blink or become fully awake. That explanation fits much of what happened. I woke suddenly. I saw a black figure. I felt frozen by its presence. It faded after I blinked. Maybe the hallway light never came on at all. My sleeping brain could have added it to the experience. The biggest problem is how awake I felt. I was not confused or drifting in and out of sleep. I studied the figure. I noticed its height, shoulders, and the way it turned into the room. I realized I was not breathing. I watched it fade. Then I got out of bed and checked the house. The memory remains as clear as other things that happened while I was fully awake. That does not prove it was real. Sleep hallucinations can be extremely convincing, but it prevents me from dismissing it easily. There was another detail I learned later that day. It was my great-grandfather's birthday. I did not know that when I saw the figure. No one had mentioned it to me beforehand. When I later saw a photograph of him, his body matched the outline I remembered. He had been a very large man with broad shoulders. His build was similar to the figure that stood at the foot of my bed. I understand why people might not believe that part. It sounds too convenient. A mysterious figure appears early in the morning, and later I discover it was the birthday of a deceased relative whose shape matched what I saw. It sounds like something added to make a ghost story more dramatic. But that is how I remember it. I did not see my great-grandfather's face. The figure had no visible features. I cannot honestly say it was him. The body shape may have been a coincidence. Large, broad-shouldered silhouettes are common in frightening dreams because they look powerful and threatening. My mind could have created that form without any connection to a real person. Then, after learning about the birthday and seeing the photograph, I may have connected the two. That is how memory works. When we receive new information, it can change the way we understand older experiences. The figure may not have looked exactly like him at the time. Perhaps the resemblance became stronger in my mind over the years. I have to admit that possibility, but the thought still gives me chills. If it was my great-grandfather, I do not know why he appeared as a completely black figure. I would expect a deceased relative visiting a child to look familiar or peaceful. This thing frightened me. Its presence seemed to stop my breathing. It stood at the foot of my bed without speaking. There was nothing comforting about it. Maybe it did not intend to frighten me. Perhaps the human mind cannot process an apparition clearly. So I saw only darkness. It may have turned into the room because it wanted to check on me or say something. The movement looked exactly like someone preparing to ask a question. Maybe that is why I woke so suddenly. Something wanted my attention. If so, it disappeared before communicating. Another possibility is that the figure had nothing to do with my great-grandfather. The birthday connection may only be a coincidence. Whatever stood there could have been something else entirely. That idea frightens me more. The shape was huge. It had no face. The darkness inside it was deeper than the room around it. It watched me for 30 seconds while I stopped breathing. If it was not a relative, I have no idea what it was or why it entered my bedroom. I have replayed the moment when it came around the corner many times. It did not suddenly appear beside the bed. I saw it approaching. The hallway light came on first. Then the figure moved into view. It turned toward my door and entered the room as though it knew exactly where I was. That sequence made it feel physical. A hallucination might appear instantly. This thing followed the layout of the house. It came from the hallway. It rounded the corner. It stopped at the foot of the bed. Then it faded instead of leaving. I never saw anything like it again. There were no repeated visits on my great-grandfather's later birthdays. The hallway light did not continue switching on by itself. I did not wake to find the figure in another room. It was a single event. That supports the idea that it was a dream or sleep-related hallucination. Paranormal experiences usually become more convincing when there is a pattern or another witness. I had neither. My father was asleep. My mother did not see anything. No one else heard movement downstairs. There was no physical evidence, only my memory. Still, the fact that it happened only once does not make it easier to forget. Sometimes a single event remains powerful because it cannot be compared to anything else. I have no similar experience that might help me understand it. There is only that Monday morning, the sensation of being pulled awake, the hallway light switching on, the huge figure turning into my room, the complete absence of detail inside its body, the feeling that it was staring directly at me, and the sudden realization that I had not taken a breath. That part still disturbs me the most. People hold their breath when frightened, but I did not notice doing it. It was as though breathing had become impossible while the figure remained in the room. The moment I inhaled and blinked, it faded. Maybe the deep breath fully woke my brain and ended the hallucination. That makes medical sense. My body escaped the last stage of sleep, and the image disappeared. The light turning off could also have been part of the hallucination ending. Everything vanished together. That is probably what happened. It is the explanation I would give someone else. A young person woke abruptly before sunrise. They experienced a vivid shadow person hallucination. Fear caused them to hold their breath. After blinking and inhaling, they became fully awake. Then they learned a family detail that gave the experience a supernatural meaning. There is no need for a ghost. I can explain it that way. Yet when I remember the figure, the explanation feels less certain. I did not experience it as an image in my mind. It looked like something standing in front of me. It occupied space. It blocked the hallway light. It turned its body naturally. It seemed aware of where my bed was. When it disappeared, I felt as though something had left the room, not as though I had simply stopped dreaming. I did not tell many people. My father believed it was a dream. My mother was not interested in paranormal ideas, and I did not want to be laughed at. For a long time, I kept the story to myself. Even now, part of me feels uncomfortable telling it because I know how it sounds. I cannot prove the hallway light came on. I cannot prove I was awake. I cannot prove the figure resembled my great-grandfather before I saw his picture. All I can say is that the memory has remained with me. I remember sitting in the kitchen with my cereal at 5:30 in the morning, waiting for my father to appear. I remember the relief of seeing him as a normal person in normal clothes. Then, I remember the fear returning when he told me he had been asleep. If my father had admitted he went downstairs, the experience could have ended there. The darkness might have distorted his shape. He could have stood in my doorway, noticed I was awake, and returned upstairs. But he had not moved from his room. The bathroom light was off. The hallway was empty. No one had been downstairs except me. Maybe my great-grandfather visited on his birthday. Maybe my mind created the connection after the fact. Maybe I experienced a sleep hallucination so vivid that it became indistinguishable from reality. I will never know. What I know is that something woke me before sunrise. The hallway light came on without footsteps. A 6'5" figure made of complete darkness turned into my bedroom and stood at the foot of my bed. I watched it for around 30 seconds without breathing. Then I took one breath, blinked, and saw it fade away. The light went out with it. Later that morning, I looked at a photograph of my great-grandfather and recognized the same broad shoulders. People can tell me it was a dream. They may be right. But every time I think about that morning, I remember the way the figure moved around the corner. It did not look lost. It did not look confused. It looked like it had come downstairs for one reason. It knew exactly which room to enter.
So that's where we'll stop tonight. Before you go, remember this. Every story you just heard was real. Real people. Real nights. And none of them saw it coming. If that got to you the way it gets to most people, do one thing before you leave. Hit subscribe. I post new stories all the time, and I don't want you to miss them. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.